Hello and welcome to I Talk Things, and today we're going to be talking about WandaVision, which is one of Marvel's newest series, and it was directed by Matt Shakman, something? Yeah, I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong. So there is a lot to unpack. For one, I've noticed that there's this trend where there is a lot more series coming out than movies coming out, and I've noticed that this is growing exponentially. I was a bit confused when, pre-pandemic, when Marvel announced the new series that was coming out, and WandaVision was on the list for it. And honestly, I didn't understand why it was just called WandaVision, and now I understand. And honestly, I still don't understand why it's called that. But let's talk about this, the creative premise. The creative premise is very interesting, and honestly, that alone is the engagement factor, because all shows have this type of engagement factor. This single thing that keeps us watching, and this is one of the main things that I kept watching, because not only did I want to know what was going to happen, but just how much of this world can I soak in. Like, the world, the way things work, overall world building is very interesting on this show, and that's why I kept watching, because it was just interesting. I mean, the creative premise is just you're going through the time periods, and you really want to see what was going to happen. So I think we start off in the 60s, I want to say, 50s or 60s, and you move to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is really, 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 really cool how this show just presents that. They definitely cater to the audience. It's so cool how they just move through that. Very interesting, and I like that. So I definitely like the creative premise because it's different from, what we're used to with Marvel. Because we're used to, bad guys, an organization, fighty, punchy. But this is more of a slow burn, and just more of, just a little bit different from what Marvel has previously done, which I really think is admirable. I think that's stepping out of their comfort zone. I wouldn't necessarily call it comfort zone, because I'm going to get into that, why it is a creative mess, but that is just an interesting factor. Let's go into the story. So the story is rather simple. They're moving through the time periods, and Vision and other people outside are trying to figure out what in the world is going on. There is this big red graphically wall, and they're trying to get to the other side, trying to stop Wanda because she's holding these people hostage. You really don't get that until like a couple episodes in. So the story is pretty interesting. There's not really an identifiable villain. Matter of fact, I didn't really even think there was going to be a villain. I thought it was just going to be, are we going to talk sense into Wanda? But despite that, story is very interesting, and I like how Vision is sticking to his personality and not really going up to Wanda about it, but trying to figure it out on his own, because we know that Vision is dead. And so this story asks a lot of questions. So it's asking questions like, how in the world is Vision here? How are they moving through this series, these worlds? How are they moving through these worlds? And about the kids, how in the world are they just growing up so fast? And just a lot of different factors, like her brother showing up, and just, different things. So the story is pretty solid, but there's just one little factor about the story that I did not like, which I call it a creative mess. This show is extremely creative. Let's not forget that the show is creative. That came a price, I'm assuming. But like a lot of creative shows that I'm currently watching to your eternity, and it's very creative, and I've never really, to be honest with you, never really seen a show like that before. It's very fun and intriguing, and that idea on its own is worth watching. So what I mean by a mess, I mean the villain. And I think a lot of people saw this coming when they clicked this video, was that this villain they didn't really care for the villain. I personally do not care for this villain. Just personally. A lot of people are black and white on the subject. Ain't no way that this villain, a lot of people are just black and white. And honestly, if you're black and white, then yeah, this is how I feel about the villain. Now, I am going to incorporate a screenwriting perspective, or just a storytelling perspective in general, since I am also into screenwriting. I am going to give a perspective on it. The villain, first off, was just popped up out of nowhere. It wasn't hinted. It was not a hinted villain. Honestly, if you're going to create a villain, you should always have it hinted. What I mean by that is, you should make the audience think, oh, why didn't I catch that? Instead of her? That's what I mean by that this villain was not a good villain. You definitely do not want this type of villain. At all. Now, was it creative? Yes, it was creative. I'm not even gonna lie. When she was introduced, I could not stop singing, it was Agatha all along. So yes, she was a creative villain. I'll give her perks. But she popped out of nowhere. So yeah, I don't really like that. Not saying that you can't do that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it would have been for that type of show. First off, I feel like this show didn't really need a villain. I just felt like they just got a villain so they get a good fight scene in, you know, to let them know that, hey, you're still watching a Marvel movie. And just this villain just didn't feel needed. Matter of fact, when she was revealed, I didn't see much of, like, how did this affect the story that much? It didn't really affect the story. Not that much. She was honestly unforgettable. And honestly, if she had affected the story that much, or did something a little bit more, then I feel like the story would have been better. So that's why I call it a creative mess, because this villain is not it. And I'm sorry. Now, is she creative? Yes. Does it ruin the show? No, it doesn't ruin the show at all. Agatha does not ruin the show. I still had an enjoyable time. I just feel like when we got to the third act, everything just started falling apart for me with the show. I feel like this villain was just here just for the sake of villainy. I felt like it should have been more focused on Wanda. It was focused on Wanda. More, you know, like, in terms of Wanda battling herself, which I think she was. Or was it Vision battling herself? Something like that. Overall, it was an enjoyable show. I just believe that what can screenwriters or anybody in storytelling or anybody who just like to learn about this stuff can learn. Villains should actually be an opposing thing and actually threaten the plot. Not only the plot, but the protagonist. So what I mean by threaten the plot, I mean threaten the protagonist's internal conflict, which is their desire versus fear. Should threaten that and threaten their whole foundation of what they believe in. In this case, Wanda believes that all Wanda wants is a perfect world. And that is her internal conflict. She's trying to fight that. This is what I mean by it's a creative mess. It's a step up for Marvel in terms of just content. Because, honestly, previous Marvel movies, it's very hard for me to get past 5 minutes of some of those movies. I honestly have to force myself to watch to the end. But this is just my opinion.